Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Wednesday, January 29th for a very special edition. It is our 100th episode of the Bird's Eye View podcast. We're very excited to be here today. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And to celebrate 100th episode, we are going to look at all of the top 100 prospect lists and dive into the Toronto Blue Jays, who were named across baseball as the top prospects. Jory, before we get into that, we do have some news to cover or some rumors to cover. I guess you can say there has been a lack of tangible news in recent weeks, but there's some whispers again.
Yes, it's more of the same, it seems like, for these Toronto Blue Jays. Scott Boras has sent his minions to go and bother the Blue Jays front office, or at least one can only assume that's the case because Pete Alonso is a name that continues to be linked to the Toronto Blue Jays over the past week or so. For a period, it was close. Then for a period, nothing was imminent. And we've got guys like Mark Feinstad saying that there's maybe something happening. And we've got other, Mets reporters saying that this is going to happen. And of course, you get Shai Davidi saying, I don't know what you're talking about. And you get Ben Nicholson Smith saying that he's changing agents. It's a whole mess of things. And that's not even the only guy that the Blue Jays have been linked to over the past week or so.
Yeah, we have Mark Feinsand writing yesterday, I believe, that the Blue Jays are emerging or the most serious among teams vying for Max Scherzer. So kind of toss that into the mix there. But I think the Pete Alonso stuff is the most interesting because of course there was the buildup. I believe it was maybe Friday or Saturday where there were some reports floating around that Pete Alonso was signing with the Blue Jays. There was, I think Andy Martino wrote that it was on the 10-yard line, kind of all this stuff, and obviously the guys at Sportsnet come out and they're like, hey, we need to cool down on this. It's not happening right now. It could happen, but it's not happening right now, and it seems like Pete Alonso just wants to be a Met, and they're trying to get 10 million more dollars out of the Mets.
I mean, there's that report that came out just a while back basically saying that he made them an offer, which is a little bit unique from a free agent perspective. I don't know if I can recall too many of those making their way out to the public, at least. So, again, like you said, the Mets seem like the obvious fit, so to speak, although they've apparently moved on. And I mean, Steve Cohen is certainly not expressed an enjoyment with the situation. He seems to be quite irritated with the Alonso camp. But I mean, who isn't when Boras is involved in a negotiation? So, I mean, the Blue Jays are kind of the second fiddle right now. Word is they have some cash, but who knows how much cash. And of course, there's the second apron or whatever it's called with the competitive balance tax they've got to look out for. I know apron's like an NBA term, but the whatever.
CBT, yeah.
It's the CBT is of imminence
It's
for these
all it's
Blue
all the same. It's
Jays.
it's there to punish you for spending more money.
Yeah, which is of course because of course. Did you see that report by the way that apparently a lockout could be imminent because of the Dodgers spending and spending and spending? I don't know. I'm side questing here a little bit, but needless to say, the Blue Jays would be a better team with Pete Alonso on them. But I also don't know how much I buy that Pete Alonso is going to end up a Toronto Blue Jay. But I
I
guess that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation because, as we've progressed through this offseason, we Pete Alonso, I don't think was really a name that we've had on the radar for all that long. I think a couple episodes ago we talked a little bit as like, would you give Pete Alonso like a 1-year deal? And obviously it kind of sounds like he's going to end up taking one of these opt-out heavy contracts, but what do you think of the fit? I mean, obviously, all things considered, Pete Alonso comes in, probably spends a lot of time as your DH, probably, gives Vlad some time to DH, pushes Vlad to third sometimes. Um, it's not as clean a fit as say like Alex Bregman, but it seems like this is the direction that the Blue Jays have at least pursued because Bregman obviously kind of wants more of a long-term deal and more guaranteed money. So the Pete Alonso thing is probably 3 years an opt out, and you're looking at him being a Blue Jay for like a year, maybe two, depending on how things go. And obviously the industry has kind of soured on Pete Alonso just based on the lack of interest and all these teams who needed first basemen opting to go in different directions.
Yeah, objectively, the fit is non existent because you've got a big Vladdy sized piece right there at first base. So you don't need a Pete Alonso to go play first base. And you've got guys that you're going to need to DH every once in a while to get them off their legs, right? So, this is a weird fit to say the least. Pete Alonso still hits bombs. I mean, it would be fun to have him on the team. Pushing Vlad to third and having a Pete Alonso, Bo Bichette, Vladdy Guerrero Jr. core as your infield with Andres Jimenez basically having to play four positions at once probably wouldn't be ideal. But I'm not going to say no to adding Pete Alonso, but there's really no fit whatsoever beyond just looking for some slug, which to be fair, the Jays need.
Yeah, I mean, going from just Vladdy to Vladdy, Santander, and Pete Alonso would be a heck of an improvement for the middle of your lineup and the lineup, however you want to build it. I mean, Pete Alonso makes you better offensively, and I think at this point, why not, right? Like, if it's going to be a 3-year deal and it's likely that he's going to opt out after year one, like, why not? I know I've been pretty vocal on like the I don't want to see Vlad play third base train. And I think it would be a pretty dramatic pivot for this front office to go from what they've built defensively to bringing in Anthony Santander to play left field and shift Vladdy to third and put Pete at first. I think that would be a pretty dramatic shift. But I mean, the DH is there for a reason, right? So you can bring in Pete Alonso and filter guys through there. I don't think that the move would make Vlad a full-time third baseman. But I mean, you know what? For a team that was starved for offense last year, this would be a heck of a way to follow up your Anthony Santander signing.
Yeah, it would make the team better. Again, I don't really think that's up for debate per se, but I just don't really love the idea of Vlad being your third baseman for more than 30 games. And not even as maybe stretching it. I don't think he's a guy that you want playing not a premium position, but certainly one that requires a little bit of athleticism, which no disrespect to Vladdy, but there's a reason he's a first baseman.
Have you seen? So I can't figure this out. There's this TikTok account that is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and the only thing in the bio links to Vladdy's Instagram. Have you seen this account on
I
TikTok
haven't had
or
the chance. I
are
haven't
you
seen it.
scrolling TikTok like that? Anyways, so this account, right? But like it's a ton of videos of Vladdy working out and like he looks fantastic. Like he
Okay.
looks like he's in great shape. So I don't know, maybe he is, zoning in on his athleticism, his fitness to be able to play third base. But I mean, obviously it kind of the classic offseason thing, you look at guys
Yeah,
as
best
their
shape of his life. Yeah.
best shape of
Could
your
you
life,
could you
right?
imagine if he came back to camp, best shape of his life and is plus defender at third base, and all of a sudden it becomes very clear that Pete Alonso fits much cleaner now that you need a third base or you no longer need a third baseman because Vlad is your third baseman.
I mean, you look at Vladdy's 100, he played 100 innings at third base last year. He had a 0 DRS
Like
and
I just
a
don't. It's
plus one
such a
outs above average.
small. It's such a tiny sample. If he plays another 500 innings at third base, do you think he's a league average glove?
No.
Like that's the end of the conversation. I don't know. Again, like I want the dingers, I want the bombs, I want
Yeah.
Pete Alonso because it would be fun for the Jays to do something fun. But objectively, what's the fit?
DH, swing him through DH, give Vladdy 20 games at third base, Pete Alonso some games at first base, let Santander DH, let Springer DH in those games, and then in the other games, Pete and Vlad are rotating between first and DH, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
But I
I
mean,
guess.
why not? Like, I mean, I guess that does make sense. You're only sacrificing defense in some games at third, in that situation, and you could probably, you know, strictly manage those games as to where, like you have a left-handed heavy hitting team and you can put Vlad at third, right? So, you're playing the Red Sox, Devers, Casas. how many ground balls is that lineup hitting to third base? Probably not that many. So I think
Yeah.
yeah, you can definitely manage around it. Let's go into Scherzer though. Between Alonso and Scherzer, it seems to me like Scherzer might be the more likely candidate to be a Blue Jay.
Well, he's been linked to them a lot more, I think. And
And
obviously this
it seems
last
like
week,
he hasn't had like a huge market, right? So
yeah, like this last week, it's been a lot more Scherzer. Say that 5 times fast. And especially from the prominent Sportsnet people, whereas the Alonso stuff has come from elsewhere. But the Scherzer fit, I think, is kind of fun. I don't know how much he's really going to pitch for the Blue Jays. I wouldn't expect him to throw more than 150 innings, and that is probably even a generous number for him. So I would think for him, like as a 5, I don't mind it. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with it. Uh, I don't know if you're necessarily getting a ton of mileage out of him. I mean, the Jays have done a good job actually this winter of making their pitching depth better. I mean, they just added Adam Kloffenstein, so there's another guy that's probably going to get a couple of big league innings. Maybe will slip in there every once in a while. Of course, you've got Eric Lauer already, Jake Bloss on the precipice. Like you've got options for arms, but I think Scherzer's probably the best bet of that group to be successful. I just again wonder how much you're going to be able to get out of him. But I think it would be kind of like the Joey Votto pitcher version, so to speak.
yeah, it's one of those things. Like originally, I was like, a little gung ho on Max Scherzer because it's freaking Max Scherzer, right? Like, dude is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, and you look at his past few years, like he was great in 22, but only threw 145 innings. In 2023, he was all right. Like, I mean, he helped the Rangers win the World Series, right? And I do wonder like how much of him pitching through injury to make it through that postseason kind of derailed his 2024 and how much that's going to impact him in 2025, right? He only threw 43 innings last year, had a 3.95 ERA. Like his stuff was way down. Like his stuff plus was 84
Yeah, like this
and
isn't the same Scherzer,
the
right?
fastball
So that's
velocity was 92.
yeah.
So yeah, like I mean, as a number five, I generally think it's fine. I just don't know if you bring him in for 1 year, 16 million.
Well, I wonder if you could maybe get him at half that, or I mean, even make
I
us
mean,
like a spring training invite, and he
I
comes.
don't think so.
You don't think so? I mean,
I think
listen, like Scherzer's.
Verlander got 1 year 15. Charlie Morton got 1 year 15. I think Scherzer, if Verlander, seems like there's maybe some level of competition between Scherzer and Verlander, and if Verlander's getting 1 year 15, I don't think Scherzer's taking anything less than that.
But then I just wonder if it's a worthwhile investment
I
because
mean, it's a 1 year deal. Like you defer
yeah,
you,
but
you
does that
defer
does
like half of it or whatever.
does that affect the Blue Jays' ability to improve elsewhere with tangible guys, right? If you sign Scherzer, does that take you out of the Alonso sweepstakes, so to speak? Again, who knows how real those are? If you sign Scherzer, does that leave you in a spot at the trade deadline where it's tougher to bring on money? That's the question to me is adding Scherzer tangibly going to make your team better next year if you are competitive? Are you bringing him in for a retirement tour and he's got a 4.4 ERA and is throwing 5 innings a game and you're not even really stretching him out very much and you're looking for a fifth starter by the time the trade deadline rolls around because he's just not cutting it, right? That's to me the question when you go out and give a guy like that substantial cash, because giving him $16 million would take them pretty close to the next threshold of the competitive balance tax. No.
Yeah, it seems to me like they are pretty maybe willing to do that. I mean, just based on obviously there's interest in Alonso, right? And it seems like there has been offers potentially extended between the two sides, and obviously everybody's kind of waiting to see what Alonso is going to do. But I think it seems like the Blue Jays are willing to go above that third CBT again, like business opportunities, whatever. Like to me, Scherzer and Alonso are a business opportunity because they are like baseball, not royalty, but like they are notable star level names, right? And that's going to sell jerseys, it's going to sell tickets, it's going to sell bobblehead, it's going to sell everything for the Blue Jays if you bring in those two guys, right? So I think the business opportunity is there for those guys. Like to me, if you're bringing in Jose Quintana on a 1 year, $12 million deal or whatever. Again, I think he'll probably get 15 as well. But like that probably isn't the same business opportunity as Scherzer and Alonso is. So I'm curious though, like with the Scherzer thing, just kind of reading like Feinsand's piece, like it kind of talks about like he needs to be convinced that where he's going to go is going to be competitive, right? So I wonder if he is kind of sitting there waiting to see if the Blue Jays do land Alonso before making his decision to go somewhere. And whether maybe his signing is dependent on Pete Alonso.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have any problem with that. I mean, that objectively would be the best outcome if they walked away with both of them,
Yeah.
right? So I don't think that that's a bad thing per se. And if you aren't able to get Alonso, how much of a difference is Scherzer going to make, right? It's not entirely clear. So I don't think that there's anything particularly wrong with that.
Yeah. It would be fun. Scherzer in a Blue Jays jersey. I think we talked about this last time. Put him in the montage, whatever. Um, for what it's worth, just looking like Steamer has him projected for 128 innings and a 3.97 ERA. So, like that's a pretty solid number five. Like
Yeah,
I think
that's a
you'd
five.
be
That's a fair
you would be
five.
pretty happy with that. And I think with their depth, 129 innings would be or 128, I guess, would be okay. Like
Yeah,
not
you would be
not
able to get that over the finish line for sure. You'd be able to fill the
yeah.
gaps with the aforementioned slew of guys they've got that are optionable and that are pretty young and that could be factors in the 2025 Blue Jays.
Are there obviously, what the rumor cycle of Major League Baseball has kind of slowed down. Like it's basically Alonso, Bregman. That seems like maybe he's going to go back to Houston. I don't know about Jose Altuve playing outfield, but why not? Are there any other free agents that you kind of have circled that you'd like to see the Blue Jays either pivot to or just maybe bring in?
I do think that the Quintana stuff, I know that he's not the most compelling piece, but I do think him being a lefty makes him slightly more compelling than Scherzer, maybe in that respect. But they're such similar guys. I'm not sure how different the production you're going to get out of them is really going to be. Beyond that group, I think it's really kind of the team you have right now is probably gonna be the 2025 Toronto Blue Jays. And if they are competitive this year, then you will see additional guys brought on. And the farm system isn't what it was 3, 4, 5 years ago, but there's enough now there based on the deadline returns, I think that you're going to be a little bit more flexible, have a little bit more maneuverability where you'll have opportunities to add should the season be progressing as you want it to.
Great transition. Let's get into the prospect stuff. This week we've seen, I think it's pretty much every major outlet release their top 100 prospect lists, and the Blue Jays seem to be a little bit of a divisive team. You look at all the lists. We can run through them all. Baseball America has Ricky Tiedemann ranked 100th. MLB Pipeline had Arjun Nimmala ranked 87th and Trey Savage ranked 88th. The Athletic had Arjun Nimmala ranked 71st and Trey Savage 96th. And ESPN had Arjun 69th, Ricky 89th, and Aurelvis Martinez 98th. So I mean, you go from having either one or three prospects on any of the lists, and there's nobody in the top 50. There's nobody in the top 60. I mean, the highest anybody got is of course ESPN having Arjun 69th. Um, what do you think about the general area that all these guys kind of came in?
I think it matches a lot of what we've heard. I'm really compelled about the Ricky Tiedemann placement because he obviously makes two lists. He makes BA at the back end there, and then ESPN gives him some love as well. And they're obviously in love with what we saw in 22 and the tantalizing stuff that he's clearly got in his arsenal. The issue is, of course, his health and the ability to accumulate innings, which has not been there yet. So to me, that says that BA really sees a lot of upside. And ESPN, of course, you've got Kyler McDaniel, probably the same thing, right? I think that he's of all the prospects that the Blue Jays have, I don't think that there's one that has the most exciting or has a more exciting upside than he does. For Savage, we hear a lot about a mid rotation guy. With Arjun Namala, it's early temper expectations, might stick it short, hopefully will, and 30 home run power, which is obviously extremely enticing, but did so at the lowest levels of the minors and seems unlikely to make it to the high minors this year. And if he does, it's only going to be a brief cameo, I would think. So I think Ricky is the most interesting of that group. To be only included in two is obviously not ideal, but uh, I mean, to to me, he's the guy I think that I'm most intrigued by, which is interesting because of the TJ.
Yeah, I mean, like the stuff is has always been just super intriguing, right? Like you kind of know that he's got like the upside of being a 1-2 type of guy, and like you said, he's got probably the most upside of anybody in the Blue Jay system. And ranking prospects is never an easy thing to do because you have to consider proximity to the majors. You have to consider potential and what they can be, right? Like, would you rather, are you going to take a 22-year-old in AAA or a 17-year-old in the Dominican Summer League, right? Like there's totally different processes, and that's why, looking at so many lists is a good thing. Um, I do want to note on the Baseball America side that they also released a piece that was like 15 prospects that just missed the cut, and Savage, Arjun, and Orelvis were all listed as three guys that just missed the top 100 there. So like you look at that, and that is positive, I suppose. And then you have Jeff Ponce come
Well,
out after,
here's
and
here's
he
what I wanna
says.
here's what I wanna ask you also is what does that tell you about the Blue Jay system that they've got three guys that just missed the cut?
Yeah, I think you look at it, and to me, that does say that they are close, and I think you look at it right. Like to me, Orelvis has the down arrow, right? Like he was on the BA top 100 last year, and obviously we've talked about it at length, where the suspension totally kills any momentum he has, and leaves you kind of questioning what he can be at the major league level in a year where he could have really proved himself to be a future piece. Um, and then Savage and Arjun, I think you look at them as guys who probably have up arrows. And I think Savage, to me, it's really weird that he was ranked as the 11th best prospect in that draft class and then is now being ranked below guys in his draft class despite not having pitched, right? Like there's nothing to
Well, it's
me
just the
that,
lack of information, I guess, that these other
yeah,
guys
like
have new information, right? I guess
I
that's
just
the
I just
idea.
don't get why you would look at it and be like, well, he hasn't pitched, so I guess like he hasn't pitched, so you move him down. I guess that makes sense, but to me, he's gonna be on their midseason list for sure when he comes out and starts the year. Namala, I would assume or figure that he is kind of in the same boat, right? Like to me, I think you look at those two guys as guys
Well,
who
but
will be on the
between the
top
two,
100.
I don't know. Between the two, I'd say you Savage for sure, but I'm not so confident Namala will just because I think that again, there's so much variance in his outcomes, right? I mean, he could come out and he could really struggle again like he did last year to start the year, and he's off the top 100 lists. Savage, I think, will probably get the benefit of the doubt because it'll be his
Yeah.
first pro outing, and he's probably going to start in high A and you know very rapidly move through the system.
I think it's significant that Baseball America was the only one of the four that we're talking about here that didn't have Arjun in their top 100.
Yeah, well, that to me, it's interesting because BA giving Ricky the spot, and mind you, it's a 100th spot, is to me indicative that they value the upside, but Arjun Namala is nothing if not upside.
Yeah. Like I was gonna say, like Jeff Ponce from Baseball America, he's the guy who kind of handles all the Blue Jays stuff. He tweeted out after that he had five Blue Jays in his top 100, and that it's the most underrated system in baseball.
I mean, that probably is because he's so closely linked to the organization. But I mean, it's listen, like there's something there in terms of the system having depth that it didn't have to start last year and having pieces. Arjun is a guy that's got the up arrow, like you mentioned, has really improved his stock over the last little while. Savage is a new addition, obviously, to the group. Ricky's not trending in the right direction, and neither is Relvis, but both still getting some love in some capacity from the major outlets. Like there's guys here that you like that weren't here in the same way last year.
Yeah, I mean, Pont, after he tweeted that out too, he revealed that his five were Ricky, Relvis, Namala Savage, and Josh Kasevich. And obviously he kind of seems to be like the high man on Josh Kasevich. But you know what? I think there's a world where come mid-season where Baseball America updates their rankings based on graduations and all this, that you could see like a decent number of Blue Jays crack that top 100, right? Like Tiedemann will probably still be there because he'll move up just based on graduations, even though he hasn't pitched. Namala, he'll probably, again, if these guys are just on the outside looking in, they'll move up. So Namala or Relvis, Savage, they'll kind of
Well,
bump onto the
I don't know.
list.
Relvis is another one that, because it
I
depends on what he
mean,
does, right? Is he
yeah,
going to
like
just keep
if
toiling away in AAA?
but it seems to me if you were to bet on like a Relvis's AAA WRC plus this
Yeah,
year, like if I give you a line over under 140.
it's probably in the ballpark. I
Like
mean,
I
you were the one that pointed it out last week. It might have been while we were recording. It might have been while we were off air, so to speak. But he loves repeating levels. He
Yeah.
feasts.
140 might be a little high, kind of looking at his prior results. But I mean, you look like 2023 when he was back in Double A for the second year, it was a 122 WRC plus. 2024 was his second go around at Triple A, and it was a 120 WRC plus with all the time missed. So a third year in Triple A, you have to imagine like 140 is probably a little aggressive because if he has a 140, he's probably in the big leagues.
Probably.
Um, but I think 120 is easily the floor there. Like he hit 17 home runs in 74 AAA games last year.
Yeah, he's gonna rake again. Like the
Like
power is what everyone loves, right?
in Kylie McDaniel's
But
write
but
up today,
also,
he called Elvis like big league ready, and I don't
yeah,
disagree with that.
what I also think is worth considering, though, Andres Jimenez being in the equation here impacts him, I think,
Yeah.
maybe more than any other prospect, because Will Wagner, maybe he slots in at third base, maybe he shuffles around. He's a guy that's still compelling enough that he's going to be in the big leagues. I don't know if there's anyone in that second base glut, beyond, of course, Spencer Horwitz, who actually gets traded, that's affected by his presence, quite like a Relvis.
No, 100%. And I mean, if Elvis was like passable at third base, then this is a totally different conversation. And I think you're penciling him into the opening day lineup, and you're looking at a Vladdy, Santander, or Relvis like 3, 4, 5. Depending on whatever happens with Alonso. But if Relvis, I mean, who knows? Maybe he comes back having worked a ton on his
Well, I
defense
I
over the
think that
winter.
this is like the spring training. Obviously, spring training numbers, buyer beware. But he is a guy that at spring training is going to have microscopes of
Yeah,
microscopes on him.
yeah. I mean, he's 23 years old, so there's still, so much time for him, but it does kind of feel like his future as a Toronto Blue Jay is going to be really dependent on what happens to him this season, right? Like he's a guy who is now blocked at second base. Like Andres Jimenez obviously has a very long-term contract and is not going to be, he could be moving off second base. He could be moving to shortstop. So maybe that's where room opens up depending on what happens with Bo Bichette. But for me, like I do think that I would like to see a Relvis get major league reps this year. He kind of has like the difference making potential that a lot of the ceiling that a lot of the recent Blue Jays call ups like don't quite necessarily have, right? Like I
Yeah,
think a Relvis again, like if I give you a line, Aurelvis Martinez all-star game appearances 0.5.
he has the slug to be a potential future All Star, and that's not
Yeah.
to say a perennial All Star, but just the
Like
potential ability to.
0.5, I'd probably take the over.
Well, he's got the chance to slug 30 in the big leagues. He's even got an outside shot to slug like 40, right? He's
Yeah.
just that kind of power potential. And he's obviously got the swing and miss in his game that has to, be considered. It'll be a factor. But in terms of just pure ability to mash the ball, he's up there with Vlad in the Jays' just entire org.
Yeah, it's obviously very impressive, and he's going to be, I think one of the early season stories to watch. Like you mentioned in spring training, I think where he kind of gets lined up. Like if he's playing a lot of second base in spring training, then you can kind of read between the lines that he's going to be starting the year in AAA. But if he gets a lot of reps at third base, he could be competing for a spot for sure.
Yeah, I think they give him a genuine kick at the can. I just don't know if he's going to hang
Yeah,
at
for
third.
sure.
I want to talk about the BA full team list, but just before we do so, because we haven't really talked about him.
Yeah,
Savage. I want to get a little bit into like
yeah.
Savage and his spot as a Blue Jay. I kind of said that I think he starts in A ball, but maybe he starts in Double A. Like, what's your kind of read on him?
Yeah, I think Keith Law said the other day that he needs to start in Double A because he's just gonna like he said something about starting him anything lower would like stunt his development or anything like that just because he's gonna be so dominant and like I can kind of see that like I do think that he's just gonna shred through low A or high A competition so I think that it's Double A seems to be like the spot for him but I don't think that he starts there. I think you look at the weather in Vancouver, you look at the weather in New Hampshire. They're two not necessarily the warmest places, not necessarily ideal for pitching scenarios. So I think for him to make his pro debut in Dunedin at the complex just kind of makes too much sense in the better weather where you can stay healthy and kind of be close to the organization, everything like that. I think even you floated like maybe you let him start in extended spring training and kind of work there. Um, I understand like the want for him to start at Double A because that does seem to be like the level appropriate based on his results and talent as a pitcher. But I think when you kind of take all things into consideration, it seems likely to me that he's either going to kind of do like the extended spring training thing or kind of get a few starts under his belt in Dunedin at low A, Class A, and kind of work his way up from there. I know the Blue Jays kind of used to employ like a you need to play at every level of the minors before getting the call to the big leagues kind of thing. Um, but I think when you draft a college pitcher who is as successful as Trey Savage, I think you could probably, skip a level or two. And obviously, we've got some friends in Vancouver, and it would be really awesome for them to get to see Trey Savage and like Arjun Amala and all these guys play there. But yeah, I think Savage should throw the most of his innings this year at Double A.
I think a fun thing to talk about and a completely nonsensical thing to talk about. How good his spring training would, or how good would his spring training have to be for him to just totally skip the minor leagues altogether? Is that a
How good would his
possibility?
spring training have to be to start in
I
the
don't know,
the
man.
big league
Listen, he was
rotation?
the 21st overall pick. I don't remember exactly what
20th.
number. 20th overall. He's a 20th overall pick. Guys have done it in the past. They've jumped over the minor leagues. It's not a common thing, but if anyone is equipped to do so, is he the guy? Like, is this an
I
insane
mean,
thing to even ask? I mean,
we
they needed number
were
five.
you and I were talking about it. It was last week, and just kind of looking at comparisons, right? Like recent comps that you could look at, and I don't want to put Paul Skeens into this discussion because that is a ridiculous talent that might already be the best pitcher in the major leagues. But I think you look at the 2023 draft, the seventh overall pick, Rhett Lauder, as an interesting kind of pathway. Like he made his MLB debut last year. He made six starts with the Reds, and what he didn't make his pro debut in the year that he got drafted, and he started in high A through 25 innings there, went up to double A through 77 innings there, and then made one start in triple A, and then got the call to the big leagues. Like to me, that's if you're building like an ideal pathway for Trey Savage, like that is the ideal path where he throws five starts with Dunedin, skips high A, goes to double A, makes 15 or so starts there, gets the call to Buffalo, and then if the Jays are lacking in the rotation, if they have some injuries, then maybe he's shown you enough that he can do that. But if not, then he's him ending the year in AAA, I think would be just a significant win for him and for their player development staff, if
I'm
whether it results in MLB innings or not.
I'm just salivating at the thought of him being in AAA, and he's a top 15 prospect in baseball, and maybe he's added a tick or two on velo. And I mean, it's all everything would have to have gone right, but it's not a 100th percentile outcome. It's like a 70th percentile outcome.
Yes. Like I think the like 50th percentile outcome for him is probably throwing 110 innings at Double A this year.
Pretty much.
Right? Like anything below that and you're probably a little bit maybe not 110, that's probably a little bit heavy for his first year as a pro, but
Say 95.
and anything less than 80% of his starts coming at Double A this year is a disappointment, and anything more than that is a huge win.
Yeah, that's no, that sounds about right. Uh, I think the other thing too is inning workload,
Yeah.
because I wonder how much the Jays are going to treat him with the kitty gloves, and I wonder how much they're going to get him moving to the big leagues. I mean, I think of like a guy like Alek Manoah. I think had a pretty rapid rise to the big leagues, and of course, this is not the same Alek Manoah now as it was when they drafted him and when he came up and was a Cy Young contender, and it looked like he was the next guy for the Blue Jays. He was their ace in the making, and this and that, and blah 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 blah. But I wonder if they're going to accelerate him, and I wonder if he's a guy that's going to have the opportunity to take matters into his own hands, because it seems like he will be.
Yeah, no, 100%. And then I think, you kind of read all the reports and like Bulldog on the mound stuff, like he's definitely going to be out there competing.
For sure.
And he's going to be like making his best case to move up at every level. As far as the like kitty glove stuff goes, I don't think that you need to do that whatsoever because he threw 93 innings last year with East Carolina. Like to me, he needs to come out and be throwing like 110, right? Like 110 total innings, maybe even more if he's feeling good and everything like that. Like I just don't think that there's any reason to look at a guy like that and be like, yeah, we need to scale back your innings.
No, there's no, it would be nonsensical to do so unless he gets hurt, right? And
Yeah.
if he gets hurt, that's things have gone off the rails, right?
If he gets hurt, there's some issues.
With the Blue Jays and the
Yes.
whole everything.
Yes.
This episode of the Bird's Eye View podcast is brought to you by BioSteel. Use code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order at biosteel.ca. Again, that's code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order. For all your high performance hydration needs, visit biosteel.ca. Thank you again to BioSteel for sponsoring today's episode.
Let's move on because we've talked a little bit about Ricky. We've talked a little bit about Aurelvis. We've talked a little bit about Savage. We did do some Argent talk, but I want to kind of get into like some of these guys who are just kind of behind that top four because I think those four are like pretty consensus the top four. Like if you want to mix in like an Alan Roden or a Josh Kasevich into that group, like I think you could, but I don't think that they the upside of those four is just far and away the best in the farm system. But who else kind of behind those four intrigues you as like if you had to pick a non Ricky Savage, Arjun, or Relvis player to crack one top 100 list at midseason, who would it be?
I mean, the boring pick, but I think the right pick is Alan Roden. I think
Yeah.
that the stick there, he's done it at the high minors. He's had a lot of success. A lot of the projection systems already like him. He's a guy that's been circled on a lot of guys' prospect watch lists and so forth. He's clearly the guy I think that is the sleeper top 100 guy. And he's not there right now. He doesn't have the huge build of a corner outfielder. He seems like he's probably going to play either left or right field in the big leagues. He's not a great power hitter, more of an on base guy, but he's had success at basically every level. And as he's moved up to the high minors, he's continued to have some success. He's blocked by several pieces. I mean, you look at George Springer's in the corner. You've got Anthony Santander now in the corner. You've got Joey Loperfido in the mix. You've got uh, Jonathan Clase in the mix. You've got so many outfielders that his spot, in of itself is not guaranteed by any means. And he could just end up being a trade piece. But he's a guy that seems like a good bet to become a major league contributor in the next year, maybe 18 months or so.
Yeah, I mean he finished off this season as the player of the month in September, right? So he's obviously like he's an up arrow guy. I think if you're looking for like leadoff profiles, like he's probably what you want in a leadoff hitter, right? So, and obviously he hits the ball well. Does get to some power. Like he hit 16 total home runs last year in 125 games. So like there's enough power there. I think what are the odds that he's like the Blue Jays leadoff hitter in 2026? Like I would be
Put him
okay with
high.
that. Like I
I think that's a fair bet.
yeah, I think you would probably feel pretty good about that if that is how that transpires. And he's really interesting, and I think he's probably a little bit underranked. I think could probably be like in that mix of like near top 100 prospects for sure. Along with the guys who have kind of just missed out.
Yeah. Well, I took a hitter, and you'll have a more intimate maybe knowledge on this side. But pitchers, who's the guy that you kind of like?
Yeah, I mean, you look at their like Baseball America released their top 30 for each organization today, and of course, Jake Bloss comes in at number 5 for the Blue Jays. Um,
You're the
I'm
low man
not,
on
I'm not,
him,
I'm not,
so
I'm not the biggest like Jake Bloss believer, but again, like he's a guy who flew through the minors last year, right? Like honestly, if you're looking for like a Trey Savage kind of comp, right? Like I don't think Jake Bloss was ready to be a major league pitcher last year with Houston, but just out of necessity, they made him that. He's a guy who probably should have gotten more time in Double A. You just look at his numbers there. Like the ERA was good, but the strikeout stuff wasn't huge, and the command is obviously really good. So. He's a guy that I think is going to be really interesting to watch this year because it sounds like he was toying around with some stuff once he got to Buffalo last year after the trade, and it didn't necessarily have good results. He ended up with the 6.91 ERA. The walks kind of spiked for him as well, and the strikeouts were kind of middle of the pack. So I think you look at him as a guy who really needs to prove it this year. And to me, like the stuff isn't huge, but obviously he's able to play it up a little bit with the fastball, which kind of has like the invisible fastball traits. And I'm interested to see how his first few starts go because he's a guy who I think if he comes out and has like 4 good starts where he shows that he has like the command back that he showed before he got to Toronto, I think he kind of puts himself as like firmly atop your pitching depth situation, right? Like I think let's say that the Blue Jays sign a starter because it seems like they've wanted to all offseason and haven't been able to do that yet. If you had to like rank who's going to make the most starts for the Blue Jays this year, you're going like Gosman, Barrios, Bassett, Bowden, Francis, whoever they sign, and then I would put like Yariel sixth. But if Jake Bloss could come out and have like 3 or 4 really good starts to start the year with Buffalo, I think he probably slides into that number 6 role. But as where it stands today, I don't know if I would put him there. Like I would almost rather like Adam Kloffenstein be like your seventh guy up than Jake Bloss right now.
yeah, I think that you're looking at this year right now as a development year for Bloss. Like he's not a young guy per se, but he's not old either. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm just pulling it up right now to double check, but I believe he's 23. He's gonna spend most of the year as a 23-year-old. Like he's maybe a year older than you, Savage. Like he's still very young. He's still got a lot of runway in his development cycle as a pitcher, right? I think that to me, this year is a development year for him. And if it happens to go well, then you can look at this year being a major league year. I don't know if I've got Eric Lauer ahead of him just in terms of talent, but I think just the age and the
yeah,
development and protecting him, he's the guy that's ahead of him. And then of course Clough, like we mentioned, is probably as well. So he's probably a little bit lower down the depth chart, but I think that it's a very scalable spot. I don't think
yeah.
that he's by any means blocked.
No, and the other thing too, like I think the age point is really good. Like he's not a finished product, right? Like he's 23 years old. He throws 4 pitches. Like he's still learning, and obviously all the stuff out there is that he's a really smart dude. Like to me, I think that he's a guy who, yeah, probably does end up being like a 4 or 5 starter once he does crack the big leagues, and that is whether that's in 2025 or 2026. Like I think that there's a big league future there, and he's just gonna kind of have to keep tinkering and find his way to do that. And I think, you know, him cracking the big leagues last year, you kind of taking that into consideration is tough to do because he was so young and probably wasn't ready. But yeah, he's going to be an interesting piece for them to build and continue to see where he kind of ends up as a potential piece of the Blue Jays, whether it is this year or next year, indeed.
For sure. Two guys I want to touch on. I want to talk a little bit about. Adam Mako is quite a bit lower on the BA list than I think we would have had him, because he's probably also in that mix to be a guy that pitches big league innings for the Blue Jays, and especially as a lefty, that makes him even more compelling. And his stuff is obviously, it seems to have played well based on his trajectory through the minors, but that's kind of not the indication you get from BA. I'm pretty high on him. I don't think I necessarily have him as a rotation piece per se, but I think his floor is a leverage arm as a reliever, and I think being a lefty allows him to even beyond that expand upon that. Maybe he becomes maybe a swingman, maybe he does become a rotation piece, but the left-handedness makes him by any stretch a major league pitcher in his future.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think last year was really encouraging for him as a guy who, hadn't really been all that healthy before he got to Toronto to now have back-to-back years of um getting to the 90 around the 90 inning mark. Like I think that's back-to-back years of wins for him. And you kind of look like the strikeout rates are really nice, and we kind of know that. And the command really bumped up, I think, in 2024 for Mako. So it's interesting to me because to me, like he's a guy, and you want to put like up arrows or down arrows on people. Like I don't think that he necessarily has a down arrow, right? Like that's kind of where Baseball America has him, dropping him down to 20th. And maybe that's just a result of the Blue Jays system getting a little bit deeper at the trade deadline, and with, some of their draft pieces and their international free agent signings. Like maybe that's just a result of that. Um, but to me, like he's just a guy who now is kind of like on a steady path to the big leagues, right? Like where he pitches a really good year at high A with Vancouver, and then he pitches a really good year at double A and cracks triple A. Now he's in his, he's going to have to pitch however many innings at AAA, right? And I don't know if he's going to be a big league piece this year. But definitely in 2026, I think you're looking at him as a guy who either needs to, show he's able to compete for the rotation, or kind of put himself in position to be like kind of a long man and pitch multiple innings out of the bullpen, and then from there you can kind of decide whether you want to slide him down into an important lefty leverage role, like you mentioned, or try and push him into like a number 4 or 5. I think he's very similar to Jake Bloss. Um, as far as their skills goes, obviously they're totally different pitchers, but you kind of look at like the results, and like if Adam Mako was in the Houston Astros system, would he have pitched in the big leagues last year?
He probably would have. I think
Yeah.
that's probably a fair assessment. He's probably going to pitch in the big leagues this year. I think. I mean, it's not as quite of a clear path to do so, but it's not impossible to envision a universe where a couple of those non prospects that we keep mentioning are struggling in AAA, and all of a sudden Adam Mako becomes the most compelling guy to bring up of that group.
Yeah, I mean they are like two, like as things are currently constructed, they are, two pitching injuries, which is not very many pitching injuries, away from needing, Mako and Bloss and, enter ex AAA pitcher to being like needing them to be able to handle major league innings.
So there's going to be opportunities.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch. I think, Mako and Bloss are going to be two of the more like important pitchers in the Jays system to watch this year. Obviously you look at other guys who can kind of fit under that important to watch category. Obviously Kendry Rojas,
Well,
he'll
that's
move
the
up
other
to double
guy.
A, right? And
That's the
obviously
other guy I wanted to ask you about. Is
we're
he's like
very
the
pro Kendry Rojas. I
yes.
I, I think just the kind of the stuff there. And the build, and just kind of the ability that he flashed, and he was so good
Well, he's like the guy that I think
for Vancouver.
the guy that people want to be like, I'm the smartest guy in the room. He's the smartest guy in the room's number one Blue Jays pitching prospect, I think. I mean, obviously, you Savage is probably ahead of him, but maybe you call him the smartest guy in the room. Says he's the number two prospect in the Blue Jays system because he had so much success last year in the low minors, and there's a lot of reason to believe that he's going to be really successful. Although,
Yeah.
who really knows? But he's the guy I think that a lot of people are really, really high on.
I think if you're grading the Blue Jays system by ceiling alone, like Rojas is probably a top five Blue Jays prospect. Like if you're looking at like what these guys can be, I think Rojas, you probably put him in the like Savage category, right? Like guys who can kind of be middle of the rotation starters, if not a little bit more, with kind of the floor. I think obviously Savage's floor is way higher than Rojas, but then he's a guy who was really good. He got the extra innings at the AFL. He wasn't able to perform very well in Arizona. Um, I think you kind of watch his starts in Arizona though, and he wasn't giving up a ton of hard contact. So like, it was kind of one of those things where I think watching those starts was important compared to looking at the results by themselves. And for him, he's got the talent, he's got the ability, and we just got to kind of follow along to see if he can put it together.
Yeah, that's the guy I think that I'm most intrigued to see. I mean, we've heard some stuff about him. I don't know how much he's necessarily going to rocket through the minor leagues in the same way he did this year, but like he's a really talented pitcher. So I
Yeah.
think that there's reason to believe that he's a guy that's going to be really successful in some way or another. You just hope that he's able to continue the momentum last year and translate it into success this year.
Yeah. Um, I know that we're gonna do like I think a more substantial prospect preview before the season begins and everything like that. So I don't want to get into like too many guys, but I do want to get your thoughts on Josh Kasevich because Jeff Ponce obviously like we said maybe the high guy in baseball on Josh Kasevich being obviously a very talented defender, a guy who performed really well at AAA once he got there last year. Um, and obviously he checks in at number six on Baseball America's top 30 there. What are your thoughts on him and like his role going forward? Because you mentioned like a Relvis being blocked by the Jimenez move and by a other like to a lesser extent like the Anthony Santander signing does impact all these guys in the same way because he comes in and blocks a Rodin, a Loperfido, Davis Schneider, like these type of guys, right? Like they're not going to be getting as many at bats because Anthony Santander is now in the lineup. But Josh Kasevich, I mean, really intriguing the way that he performed in 2024 to me. Where were you at with him and kind of what you think he could end up being for the Blue Jays?
Yeah, like a super utility guy, I think is the ideal scenario for him. I'm a stat line scouter, admittedly, on him, but I think that with Kasevich, the ability to play shortstop, which it sounds like he's got a chance to stick there. I mean, he's doing it in the high minors, and it sounds like he's been successful there. And I think that given his proximity to the big leagues, like he's a guy that you like. He's not a guy that I'm necessarily gonna say is a top 100 level talent, even though he had a lot of success at AAA. But I do believe in the talent. I think that clearly there's a lot to like there. I think the glove, I think the stick, I think that overall he's just a guy that has a lot of projectable tools. I just don't know that he's necessarily a guy that I would expect to, take the mantle from Bo Bichette by any means once the shortstop position is, it would sound like vacated in the years to come. I think Kasevich is pretty compelling as a prospect. I think that again, just the fact that he's a shortstop makes him so much more valuable. If this was a second baseman type, probably wouldn't think twice. But the fact that he is doing it at the high minors as a shortstop, as a guy that's going to stick at shortstop or maybe have to slide over to maybe third base, like is a guy that's clearly a capable future big leaguer. I think that's something to me that is likable about his game.
Yeah, I think he's in a really tough spot because I think he's obviously good defender at shortstop and kind of like one of these Blue Jays prospects that's good at putting the bat on the ball and hitting the ball at optimal angles and finding your way on base and finding your way to some extra base power that way. But at the same time, like the Blue Jays do have a guy who's pretty similar to that profile already on the roster in Leo Jimenez, right? Like he is kind of the same guy. Like you look at their results in AAA last year, like Jimenez in 57 games, 7 home runs, 131 131 WRC plus, and Kasevich in 41 games at AAA with 6 home runs and 3 home runs and a 116 WRC plus. So I mean, it's pretty similar. I think their defensive ability is the same, and Jimenez is younger than Kasevich. So one of those things where it's like there is some competition there for him, and like if Leo Jimenez was a still at AAA right now, like you're probably talking about him in the spot that Josh Kasevich is in right now.
Yeah, where you're talking about him as the guy that is the mantle holder, so to speak. I actually think Leo Jimenez is going to be a really interesting guy to follow this year, and not to get too sidetracked, but just based on his success at the high minors and whether he can translate that to the big leagues, that is going to be, I think, the more compelling almost of the two storylines. But Gasevich is a guy I think that's probably going to get big league time next year, and maybe not substantial time, but certainly. Like a comfortable chunk. He's not the type that's going to just make a cameo in September. He will get opportunities so long as he hits. And you're hoping that it's, maybe a stronger debut, but they've had guys like this. You talk about a guy like Kevin Smith a couple of years back that was a shortstop type that came up and got an opportunity. Aston Barger's another type, obviously moved off the shortstop position, but another type of that infielder that's got an opportunity to play in the big leagues. So there's going to be guys that are going to continue to do that. And Kasevich seems like he is next in line to be the guy to get the opportunity to show his talent at the big league level.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see like if he does how he performs at AAA because again, you know what, it's one of those things where he's gonna have to repeat the level and show that his 40 game cameo there was real and that the 815 OPS he posted in those games is something that he can kind of sustain to kind of earn that spot. And the good thing for him is that he's going to have the time to do it this
Yeah.
year. So pretty excited to see what he can do. Before we do go, I know I said that we're going to do. I don't want to get into too many guys, but I want you to pick one prospect from lower in the Jays system that you are pretty intrigued by.
I knew you were going to ask me to plant my flag. And I don't know if I have a guy necessarily off the dome and prepared to make a very definitive proclamation on, but I am gonna say one guy that I do quite like, and I know that I think he made it up to Double A last year. RJ Shrek, quite excited by him, quite interested by
Yeah,
him. I
the
know he's a little bit
Justin Turner
older.
return.
Justin Turner return. I know he's a little bit older. I know that he's not necessarily the sexiest of guys, but I do like what he did when he made his way over to the Blue Jays. I think there's reason to believe that he's a compelling guy. And I think that if the Jays targeted him specifically from the Mariners, that to me would indicate that there was something in his game that they were particularly compelled by. I'm just pulling up his numbers now in Double A. In 28 games, in 899 OPS, like he was hitting the ball well, and a lot of that's of course driven by, uh, I mean, the power is like he had a lot of doubles. He had 5 homers, so he was hitting the ball pretty hard. But how much of that is, I guess, uh, him being fortunate or whatever? I mean, I don't know. Like he never hit to that degree in the minor leagues beforehand. So I guess we'll see. But I think RJ Shrek is probably my guy.
Yeah, exciting. With Kasevich, I said like very Blue Jays-y in the way that he like doesn't have a ton of the exit velo, the raw power, but like makes contact with the ball at optimal angles. Like RJ Shrek probably fits that just a little bit more on base, a little bit more power. So very exciting profile for him as well for sure. I think he'll
And
be
who's your guy? Who's your guy?
yeah, I mean, just looking at the Baseball America top 30, like I mean, I'll take Jace Borfin. I think he's got a very interesting season ahead of him. He's going to start at Double A. He was at Vancouver for all of last year, and he was great in the second half in Vancouver. He had an 857 OPS, 141 WRC plus from August 1st to the end of the year, like a double digit walk rate. He got to his power a little bit better too. His ISO from August 1st on was just below 200. So really interesting there. Obviously, he had like the great pro debut where he just was smacking a ton of home runs and kind of as you might expect from a SEC slugger. But he also got some time in center field after Jason Brown got the bump to Double A. So they're both going to be in Double A. So I don't think Jace is going to be playing a corner or sorry center field there. But he made a little bit of an adjustment in his swing before having that breakout. So I think he's a guy that if he performs well to start the year in New Hampshire, like you could see him up in AAA and kind of have him being like the next Alan Roden there, or kind of guys along that profile because he is already 23, having been a college hitter. So he's my pick, and we'll get into more prospects as we get closer to the year because I think they do have a decent number of guys who are going to be very interesting to watch this year, whether it's kind of like in the make or break context, or hopefully they can kind of continue to be on the rise.
Yeah, all this prospect talk has got me itching for spring training, and I know it's still about a month away, but man, I'm about ready for it. Especially with the weather
Cannot
here. I don't know.
wait
I don't
to
know what it's like in
watch.
Calgary, but I am very much ready.
Cannot wait to watch these dudes get into the eighth and ninth innings of spring training games against the Phillies, Double A starter or whatever.
uh,
Very exciting. Well, that is going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Before we go, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is our 100th episode, and I just want to thank anybody that has listened. It's been a lot of fun for us to kind of progress through this and be able to get to this point where we have been able to reach 100 episodes. It's obviously a great milestone for us. Not possible without anybody listening. Jori, thank you for being along for the journey. I know, sometimes it's not the easiest to be in here at random times recording emergency pods or hopping on to talk about the 20th ranked prospect in the Blue Jays system. But really appreciate you, really appreciate all the listeners. And here's to 100 more episodes.
cheers to that. Cheers to that.
All right. Well, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. You can find us there at the Bird's Eye View podcast. If you're listening along on the podcast provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. You can follow us all on Twitter. I am at Worden_Zach. Jori is at Jori Negin-Shecter. And the pod is at BEV_pod. Thank you very much for listening.